heard the state's opening, and we heard one repeated statement, common sense. Just use your common sense. It's all about common sense. Okay? Now, the judge is going to give you instructions, and he's going to give you boundaries under the law. And it's not going to say, just find the defendant guilty by common sense. That's the state standard. No. Okay? The facts are far different from what the state is pronounced here today. And let me tell you, really, how this case originated. What was done and what was not done by the state in this case. Laurie Shaver grew up with Michael Shaver upstate New York. They got married as young kids, probably should have. And it was a tumultuous marriage. Went on for years and years. There was a lot of physical violence that transpired in this atmosphere. A lot. You'll see that there were injunctions imposed, that Michael was in the house, he was out of the house. It was ongoing problems. And the Shavers had some children that came upon the scene. This was not a pleasant atmosphere. Mr. Shaver, you'll hear, was very possessive. He was very combative. He was very destructive. He imposed fear in his family over and over again. And Ms. Shaver did not want to be with Mr. Shaver. That was clear. But Ms. Shaver did not resort to violence at any time, in any form, in any manner. What happened was Mr. Shaver was directed to be out of the residence. And as the state announced, yes, she began to date other people. One, Mr. Ballou, and another guy, Jereme Townson. The state didn't know about Jeremy Townson until we told them about Jeremy Townson. What happened was Mr. Townsend had been in the military. I think he was in special forces or training for special forces. And he began to date Laurie. This relationship was not, as this state would suggest, some light flame. This went on for months and months, and only after things blew up and Mr. Townsend was confronted does his tune change. Mr. Townsend, even after these charges were filed, was still following Mrs. Shaver. You'll hear. Still stalking her. This was a man that was infatuated with Laurie Shaver. Now, they did live on acreage, and there was, as the state suggests, an intent to build this duck pond. It was going to be a family affair. Kids were out there helping them try to build it. And it sounds like, what I understand, they kind of got wore down with the project and said, hey, we don't like ducks that much, basically. So they kind of abandoned their little project or desire at that stage, leaving some ground partially exposed. That was the duck pond. It was not designed by Laurie Shaver to bury Mr. Shaver or to carry out some nefarious intent in the future. That's how that came about, though. Now, what happened was Mr. Townsend was having this affair with Laurie, and Mr. Shaver was not supposed to be at the residence. Morning arrives. Mr. Shaver arrives on the scene. Begins battering Laurie Shaver. He wants her back. She was chattel to him, just like a car or a piece of property. And she informs him, we're not going back. And she starts getting the diggings being done. Minor child heard this. Isabel Shaver State didn't know about Isabel. We advised the state about Isabel, only to be turned away. Only to be turned away from their office. Because they had formulated a plan. They had formulated a design. This is how it happened, but we don't want to hear another story. So we were sent away. But Isabel will tell you what happened. Isabel has her own attorney appointed, Lady Kelly Johnson. He did not want any appearance, any discussions with Isabel that were unguided, inappropriate, but it would look inappropriate. So Ms. Johnson came on to represent her. So Ms. Johnson has advised her of the dangers of taking the stand, telling her what could happen to her if she were to take the stand. But Isabel says she's going to tell the truth, and I'm going to tell you what happened. And as she relays, is she's at the residence with her mom, and in walks Michael, carrying on. He starts to battle his wife. And Isabel hears, I'm going to kill you. She hears a lot of commotion. She hears her mother begging, leave me alone, leave me alone. She walks in the room. She'll testify. And poor old Michael is sitting in a chair with his foot on Laurie Shaver's head as Laurie's gasping. And Michael is sitting there threatening to kill her. And this young girl, in desperation and in fear, runs and retrieves a firearm. As she believes she shot Michael, she thinks she did. She says she thought she hit him. She believes she hit him. But almost simultaneously, in walks Jay. He sees what's going on. Laurie is still on the ground. Laurie has not even gotten to her feet. And Jay walks in, takes a gun from Isabel, shoots Michael Shaver in the head. Says, Laurie, get these kids out of here. I'll take care of this. Anybody says a thing about this, I'll kill you too. Laurie said, we were like deer in headlights. Got into the car, I took the kids to school. Isabel said this was so routine, the violence in this household. I was just numb, but we didn't speak about it. And Mom, as the state would want you to believe, is so infatuated with Jay, broke it off right there. We don't want to see you. Now, Laurie assumes Jay has done something with the body beyond her knowledge, its whereabouts, or anything. It's just gone. Michael's been the biggest nightmare in her life, and all she can do is bury her thoughts. That's it. Yes, the police come knocking, the police come inquiring, the police come looking around, the police get a warrant, and yes, the body of Michael Shaver is found. Unbeknownst to Laurie, Mr. Townsend had put me on that ground that they were preparing originally for the duck park. Now, the state keeps using words like common sense, just rely on your common sense, because they don't have really any evidence, no real hard evidence that Laurie Shaver killed Michael Shaver. You are not going to hear any technician, no FDLE person say, yeah, we found Laurie Shaver's prints on that tarp. We found Laurie Shaver's DNA on that tarp. We didn't find any whereabouts or knowledge or connection between that tarp, that gun, that socket wrench, hand wrench, with Laurie Shaver. Nothing. What we spoke about more, a lack of evidence. So there's no connective link between Laurie and the death of how this occurred. And regrettably, Isabel was placed in the posture now of having to come up here and tell y'all what happened. Nobody wanted to talk to Isabel. Nobody wanted to look at what truly happened in this case. So here we are. The state's case, as we stated, is really a case of conjecture. It's a case of emotion, something we spoke about before. Something to try to pull at your heart, to feel sorry for Michael Shaver. So what do they think they're going to do? We're going to get some digital data and say it came from Laurie Shaver? That digital data came from Laurie Shaver? You'll ask yourself this: how does this digital data prove that Laurie Shaver killed Michael Shaver? It doesn't. Now the state, in their bravery, has not even listed in their information anybody that she aided and assisted in covering up the crime. Why? Because they knew it's Isabel, and they didn't want to have to deal with that. So the evidence will show. They don't want to look at everything, but they should have looked at it. You see? The state was going on about this digital data. Richard Connor will be called by the defense. He's a digital data guy, like one of our jurors. And he'll talk about the expiration of IP registrations, that they expire in time, and then at a certain point, they don't link an IP address to a device, to an individual, or a location. But the state thinks we can pull this out of the ether of space, out of nowhere, and say, well, here's some digital data, throw it at you, and then we're going to assume, and you assume, on top of that, Laurie Shaver killed Michael Shaver, when there's no connected link. It's a big step to make an allegation like this. It's a huge step. It's a huger step for you to try to leap to the conclusion based on what the state's going to put before you that Laurie Shaver killed Michael Shaver. Instead, what Isabel says is what happened. There's nobody to refute Isabel Shaver. Now, we didn't contrive this witness. We went to the state early on and said, let's level with you, tell you what happened. Thinking they're going to go after Jeremy, look at what the cause was. But no, they had fixed the position, formulated a plan, and despite the powers and the responsibilities they have, they're not seeking justice, they're seeking a verdict. And the two are two opposite goals. They're not seeking justice, they're seeking a verdict. You keep that in mind. Now, Laurie is likewise charged with this crime of accessory. The state has no information, no data, no communications that anybody was given any particular assistance after this offense. No. The most the state can do, the very most the state could do here, is try to say, well, she lied this date, or maybe she lied that date, or maybe she lied that date. Okay. Laurie Shaver is not here on trial for lying or making a misrepresentation. That's not evidence of a murder. That's evidence to evoke a motion to try to anger you into a judgment, not justice. They're two different things. Now, the state carries the burden of proof, as we discussed, all the way through the case. Laurie Shaver is not required to testify. She may, right? It's up to her. But you will hear from Mr. Conner. You will hear from Ms. Bell. You will hear that. Okay? And you will hear Jeremy Townson. What I anticipate is Jeremy Townson will dodge every question. You will acknowledge it. But Jeremy Townson has spoken with the state. He's dealt with the state. This man's not going to get up on the stand, expose himself. Okay? So we could probably infer Mr. Townsend has some negotiated testimony with the state.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
First side, please. Thank you.